There we go. We are live. Welcome back to Wrath of Khan. With our last single presenter, we still have the vampire panel on after you, and the ending ceremonies after that. But you're the last person who's on by himself. I want to introduce my friend, the godfather of vampire thrillers, Brian McKinley, who's going to give us a presentation on vampires.
Yes. So, hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Jumping right in. Basically, I have a lot of notes here, so it's going to be me mostly going over a bunch of my notes and things, and there'll be time for questions and so forth afterwards. So, the first part is where I examine the folklore, the vampire and folklore. And that is largely, I've noticed there being three different types of vampires in folklore. And I'm going to go over some examples of each type. There are witches, otherworldly beings, and animated corpses. So, the first one, witches, these you're talking about the classic evil witches, not your nice modern day Wiccans, anything of that nature. Back in ancient Rome, you had the Strix, otherwise known sometimes as the Striga. They preyed primarily upon children. They have their roots in an ancient Greek myth where it was said that the original Strix was a couple condemned for cannibalism and transformed into large owls. Unlike many other cultural witches, these were considered to be owl creatures who could take human form rather than just being people practicing black magic or making deals with the devil or something like that. After gathering together in a large coven and celebrating, they would fly into the night and spot unprotected children that they could attack. In human form, they were often described as an old haggard woman. Kind of your classic witch stereotype. So you see how far back that goes. In Romania, this idea later morphed into the Strigoi, a living male witch with red hair, blue eyes, and two hearts, who would send his soul out into the night to drain animals and people of their life energy. Strigoi were the seventh son of a seventh son, and when one died, it would return from the dead as a Strigoi morta. In this form, it was a blood drinker who was repulsed by the scent and presence of garlic, which may be where Bram Stoker got that particular piece of vampire lore. In Africa, specifically the Ghana and Congo regions, there is the Odds, which is interesting. Its natural form is that of a firefly or a ball of light, but it often takes possession of the body of a tribal sorcerer and thereby gains access to that sorcerer's magic. It has the power to astrally project, speak to the dead, use spirits to harm crops, livestock, and other people. It's attracted to the blood of the tribe's most beautiful children, but can be staved off with offerings of coconut milk and palm oil. There's no reliable way to destroy an Odds, but it can be captured outside of its human form and destroyed. Sorry, no way to detect an Odds in its normal form. It doesn't have any telltale signs. But if you get it outside of its human form, it can be destroyed. There's another African vampire called the Axamon, which is another witch with some unusual traits. For one, it takes the form of a bat to scout villages, which is ironically one of the few times that you find the form of a bat being used by a vampire in old folklore outside of Stoker's novels. It's one of the few folkloric vampires, as I said, to actually have that bat connection. In this case, that victim usually finds someone who's sleeping with a foot exposed so that it can cut a small hole in the big toe and drink the blood. So yes, it's a vampire with a foot fetish. The next witch on the list is the Penanggalan, which is a normal woman by day, but by night it detaches its head from its body and flies into the night, dangling its entrails. It achieves its flight by flapping its ears and lungs like wings, and preys on young children, from which the Penanggalan drains the blood to keep itself young. Often in stories, the Penanggalan takes the role of a midwife in her human guise in order to scope out potential victims. There's no traditional way to destroy a Penanggalan, but it's deterred by garlic and by placing thorny branches on the roof of the home, which will catch the creature's dangling intestines. Since the creature requires a large vat of vinegar after it feeds, it uses the vinegar to shrink its intestines and organs back down to size so that they'll fit in the body. You can, if you find the Penanggalan's house while it's out, you can spill its vinegar, which I'm not sure how that, it doesn't destroy it. I guess it stops it from being able to retake its human form. But then you've got an angry Penanggalan on your hands, and I don't know exactly what good that is for you. The otherworldly beings. The next topic, the Lian Shi from Ireland. They appear as beautiful women, often invisible to everyone but their intended victim, and they seduce men and try to cause them to fall in love. If successful, the Lian Shi will drain him of life energy during sex, similar to a succubus. They feed small amounts of blood to him so that he's inspired to write love poetry to her. Slowly, he is drained to a husk. If, however, the man does not fall in love with her, the Lian Shi will strangle him and drain his body of blood. Although in some versions of that legend, resisting the seduction of the Shi actually causes her to fall in love with the intended victim and serve him as a slave instead, which is interesting. Rather than simply drinking blood like most vampires, this creature has an element of the vampire witch to her. She keeps her victim's blood in a large red cauldron, which is the source of her ability to shapeshift into animals, become invisible, and remain youthful. She is a word traditionally associated with the Fae in Irish folklore and refers to the ancient burial mounds Celtic people used for centuries. These mounds were often believed to be gateways between the land of the living and the land of the dead. And some of the early beliefs about the origin of the Fae mention not Arcadia, but rather the underworld. There's also a connection with the Banshee in Scotland, the White Ladies of Britain and France. Most are vulnerable to iron, but also priestly blessings and holy objects, which might explain their presence in Dracula, since these are the vampire legends that Bram Stoker would have grown up on. If we had Dacre here, I could ask him directly about that. But maybe in the vampire panel, we can get some of that out. One of the funnier ones is known as the Alp, which is elf for German in German. It's considered a demon in Germanic folklore, but in lots of ways, their fae and demons are closely related. It has the ability to shapeshift, and its one consistent feature is the white hat it wears, because that's the source of its power. The Alp is known for creeping into the beds of women at night and drinking blood from the nipples. It also enjoys the breast milk if the woman is lactating. The crushing weight of the Alp on the chest causes horrible nightmares to the victim. These dreams even had a name, Alpdruck or blood or elf dream, which is similar to the nightmare, Nachtmare. It had a penchant for knotting people's hair while they slept or re-diapering babies with soiled diapers. It was rather easily warded off by such methods as keeping your shoes beside your bed pointed at the door while you slept, protective wards and pentagrams, or keeping a mirror on your chest while you slept. I'm not sure why it had those particular weaknesses, There's nothing about it not causing a reflection, or maybe it was scared of its own reflection or something. But I didn't, in the research, I didn't find where that actually came from. If you managed to be able to steal the hat off its head, the Alp would lose all of its power and could be killed by putting a lemon in its mouth. Vampires destroyed by citrus. You heard it here. Uh, yes, the Alp had a female counterpart called the Mara, which is the basis for the term nightmare, as I mentioned earlier. Night Mara. It attacked men in their sleep, also crushing their chests and drinking their blood. But the Mara's attacks tended to be more fatal. However, you probably also noticed that this is also similar to the succubus and incubus, which is, very true. There's a lot of similarities between vampires and incubi and succubi in the old folklore. In Greece, you had the Lamia and the Impusa, which had the upper bodies of women and the lower bodies resembling snakes. In the case of the Lamia lived in deserts and cemeteries, eating flesh and drinking the blood of infants. Later Greek storytellers would give the Lamia a tragic backstory, saying that the first Lamia was a queen of Libya. Her beauty attracted the attention of Zeus, of course, who took her as a lover. Par for the course in these stories, Zeus's wife Hera became terribly jealous and punished Lamia by destroying her children. In some versions, Hera tricks Lamia into eating her own children. This drives Lamia insane with grief, and she goes on a horrific murder spree, killing the babies of her people. Additionally, she would lure men into secluded alleys for sex to drink their blood. Over time, her terrible crimes transformed her into the hideous creature that her name becomes synonymous with. However, by aligning herself with the Impusa, which I mentioned earlier, she learned to shapeshift and disguise her appearance with illusion, as did her progeny. The Impusa were the vampiric demon spawn of the witch goddess Hecate, who acted as her attendants. They were red-haired, possessed the legs of mules, and an insatiable appetite for human flesh. As with many other varieties I've described, they possessed the ability to appear as beautiful women in order to seduce men, who they would drain of their life energy during sex before consuming them. Luckily, if a man was able to resist the allure of the Impusa's disguise, it was very easy to run away from them, as their legs made them very slow. Fun little factoids. The half-woman, half-beast theme appears in several types of vampires, including the original mermaids, who were vampiric and dragged shipwrecked sailors below their waves and drank their blood. In Africa, back again to Africa, we had the Sasso Bunsen, which are these weird creatures that were sort of bat-like in appearance, with huge wings and a body covered in hair. They would pull their victims up into the trees and tear their heads off and drink their blood, snatching them up from the cotton trees where it would hide. In China, you had the Gui, or the Gaki in Japan. They looked like a translucent dark humanoid with black hair and dark eyes. They were created when a person's lower soul didn't leave their body because he led a dishonest life or committed suicide. Which, again, that connection between suicide and vampires you'll find a lot in folklore. The Quay feeds on the emotions of evil people and is somewhat harmless by the standards of most vampires. Agile and intelligent, it's also a somewhat cowardly creature, and as long as it's left alone to feed, it generally doesn't harm anyone. Should they be interrupted while feeding, the Quay would usually resort to using its magic to curse that person. They love battlefields and the chaos of war, but holy artifacts and holy ground will repel them. There are several types of guis in Chinese lore who all feed on different things, including the Zizu Gui, which name translates to blood-suck demon. So that one's pretty easy to find out, figure out what it feeds on. You had things like it would feed on emotions. Some would feed on offal and feces. Just all kinds of different things that it could feed on. The same demon appears in Japan under the name the Gaki, and in India and surrounding regions as the Preta. Souls of those who were exceptionally greedy or evil in life return, condemned to consume blood or other more repugnant substances, like I mentioned. In some stories, these creatures were invisible, while in others they take the form of monstrous humanoid figures with sharp teeth and claws, but a narrow neck, gaunt and starved, much like the Native American cannibal spirit, the Wendigo, is described as. In the Philippines, you have the Aswang. The Aswang is yet another vampire that hides in human guise during the day and then transforms, this time into a bird-like creature, in order to hunt. It flies to the house of its intended victim, usually a child, and perches on the roof directly over the spot where its prey lay sleeping. Then it sends its long tube-like tongue into the house. Using a barb on the end of its tongue, it pierces a small hole in the flesh and sips its meal. When the Aswang is finished, it flies back to its home where it will breastfeed its own children. In Australia, you have the Yara Mayahu. Like the Sambasang, it's an ambush predator that hides up in a tree, but that's where the similarities end. This one's described as a very short, red-skinned man with an enormous head and suckers on its hands and feet. It hides from the sun and generally attacks at night. Once it grabs its prey, it sucks their blood through its hands and foot suckers. Then it swallows the person whole. But here's the best part. Sometime later, it vomits the person back up completely whole and alive, but a little bit shorter. The idea being that if you're attacked often enough by this creature, you eventually become one like it. Just one of the weirder legends of creatures, only from Australia. Finally, in terms of folklore, you have the animated corpses, the most famous. The Vatala from India are spirits that possess and animate corpses, and in many tales have sorcerous powers. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Vatala are said to be a race of divine vampire beings who appear half human and half bat. It's another one of the rare cases, like I said, where you have bats and a connection to vampires, which, as much as we see them in Western folklore, that connection really didn't become popular until Stoker's Dracula. See, other vampires, like other vampires we've seen, the Vital can possess a human corpse in order to disguise itself, using fresh blood to keep the body from decaying. This time it doesn't take the body of a living person, it takes the body of a fresh corpse. In other myths, a Vital is created every time a child dies and does not receive proper funeral rites. Which is again a different origin story. Using its magic, the Vatala will enter into a home by using an enchanted thread being fed down a chimney. Typically, it preys on those who are asleep, using the opportunity to drain them of their blood, but it will also take advantage of a person who is passed out drunk. Women who have gone insane are also often fed upon, the idea being no one would believe them if they reported it. But above all, its favorite prey is children, like so many other vampires that I've mentioned. Despite this unsavory aspect, the Vital is far from a mindless killer. In fact, its most famous appearance is in the tale of King Vikram, in which one of these creatures thwarts 24 attempts to capture it by telling tales which all end in a riddle. Later, the vampire king gives the king advice on how to turn the tables on a trap which his enemy has planned for him. This is in the story Vikram and the Vampire. The Jiangshi, known very popularly as the hopping vampire, comes from China. Mythology specifically between Siberia and China. Cats jumping over fresh corpses, moonlight shining down on fresh corpses, and black magic are all forms of how to create a jiangshi from a fresh corpse. In its early form, it's literally just a stiff corpse with rigor mortis who hops around and attacks either on its own or under the command of a sorcerer. It's difficult to destroy in this form, but relatively easy to capture or elude, as it fears running water, can't move in anything but a straight line, and has a compulsion to stop and count rice, peas, or iron fillings thrown in its direction. While doing that, you can sweep them away, and the jiangshi follows so they can resume counting. In Greece, you have the Vrikolakas, or also otherwise known as a Varkalak, which is a werewolf variety. A person who has died a violent death, was improperly buried, or was cursed to undeath by a priest or excommunicated by the church, or was a witch or a werewolf in life, would rise from the dead to become a Vrikolakas. It will go to the homes of people it knew in life, usually its former friends and family, and knock upon their doors. Whoever has the misfortune to answer, the Vrkolaka, being bloodthirsty and ravenous, will ruthlessly attack them by day or night. Victims who happen to survive the attack will become this type of vampire themselves when they die, unless they eat some of the dirt from the grave of the body that attacked them. The Vrkolakas can be prevented from attacking if its resting place is found. That's where you drive a stake through the body if possessed and into the coffin, so the vampire can't rise from the dead out of its coffin to be stuck in place by the stake. Yeah, normally in original folklore, vampires didn't burst into dust like on Buffy. They simply were held in place by the stake, pinning them to the ground. Decapitation is also another surefire way to stop this vampire hiding the head where it can't be found. But the tradition was to render the body into ash. Burning it was the most effective way to stop a suspected Vrkolakas. The Varkalak, the werewolf variety that I mentioned earlier, would have fangs and claws because of having been a werewolf in life. The Draugr is a Viking myth of the undead. This fearsome revenant exists solely to guard its treasure, which Viking warriors were traditionally buried with. So once a fierce warrior in life, the Draugr was generally a very greedy person that wanted to hold on to its treasure after death, and so it would fiercely guard its treasure, its burial treasure. The Draugr could do strange tricks, like increasing its body weight and growing or shrinking, moving freely through earth and stone, and conjuring forms and seeing the future. What's more, Draugrs were said to be impervious to mundane weapons, and the only way they could be killed was being wrestled into submission by a hero and then beheaded. Some scholars even believe that Grendel of the Beowulf saga was a Draugr, and others think that we got the concept of the ogre, the troll, and dragons from these legends as well, with the guarding of treasure. So in Russia and the middle and the Eastern Europe, we have what are known as the Upir, which you might, if those of you have seen uh, the television series. Um, sorry, I'm blanking on the name of the TV series now. It was on Netflix. It had the Hawthorne's Grove. But anyway, had the Upir. It was known for having many regional variations. Sometimes in some places known as the Upire, the Upior, the Upiri, the Vapir, and the Wampir. And this is most likely the word that eventually gave us the term vampire. The Russian version has iron teeth that allow it to chew out of its grave and eat at the heart of its victim's chest. Unlike our modern version, though, it tended to be active between noon and midnight, kind of like me. The Polish variety had a stinger on the end of its tongue, like the Oswong, and it would drain its blood, and it would enjoy sleeping in a bath of blood. So it would actually regurgitate, I guess, some of the blood that it drank and sleep, buried in it. It's crazy. In Germany, the Upir resembles the Greek Virkalaka, but it needs to be destroyed with a stake made of mountain ash in a single blow. So for that one, you have to call someone like Buffy, I guess, to get that one done. You want that one strike kill. In other Slavic countries, the body has a lot of variations. The body has to be dug up and reburied face down so that the vampire can't dig its way out anymore. In other areas, you hear about garlic, prayers, and holy water. Some versions are said to be able to father children called Dampirs, who could detect and destroy vampires. So what about that most famous of vampire terms, Nosferatu? Where's he? Well, there's some debate about that. The term itself comes from Greek and means plague bearer. Many believe that it had nothing at all to do with vampires until Emily Gerard used it in her book on Transylvania, which Bram Stoker based much of his folklore and Dracula on. Others insist that there's a particularly sexually oriented vampire by that name in Central and Eastern Europe, known to return to its home and try to resume its old life. To me, this sounds a lot like the Virkalaka, but I could be wrong. So it might just be yet another regional variation of the Virkalaka. In any event, so how did we get from these folkloric vampires then to the modern day vampires and the tropes that we have? This is where we go from folklore into literature. The vampire's next stop in the 1800s is where it begins, where you have vampires showing up in numerous poems, being used as metaphors a lot by Lord Byron and Tennyson and other vampire, not other vampire poets, other poets like that, using the vampire as a metaphor for various things. And to the
Are you
point where
sure that Byron wasn't a vampire?
he may have been. It's possible. There's a novel where he is called Lord of the Dead. Hemlock Grove. That's the TV series with the Upirs that I was trying to remember.
I'll have to check that out, actually.
Yeah, it's a Netflix series. It's pretty good. It's got a werewolf too.
I thought it was mostly about werewolves, in fact, which is the reason I didn't originally check it out.
No, it's vampires and werewolves,
Yeah,
gypsies, all kinds of craziness.
cool.
Yeah, it's a good show.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just couldn't resist.
No, that's fine. I was getting tired of listening to myself talk anyway. I prefer doing the back and forth with people anyway. That's why I was looking forward to the vampire panel more than doing this. I don't even know if anybody's watching.
Oh, there are. I've actually seen a number of comments. I've been waiting until you were ready for questions before I chimed in, but no,
Oh, well,
we
let's.
got Virgo
Oh, okay.
Triad, for example, has been listening in since the beginning
Oh, great.
and made I think, a very cogent point about. Notice in a lot of the vampire lore you're talking about, and for that matter, witch folklore, it's like how often women come up,
Hmm. Oh, yeah.
and
Yeah,
uh,
vampires were almost exclusively women in a lot of regions.
it's kind of a commentary you could argue on. Let's see, Lola, I'm telling you, if you pay attention to folklore, you can tell how powerful women really are by the way they were discredited. It's amazing.
Hmm. Yeah,
And,
yeah. I don't think it's an accident.
although Teresa Holt goes to the opinion, because I pointed out in chat, of course, that the Impusa in Greek mythology are probably kind of where we get this whole redheads don't have souls thing. And her
Oh,
comment,
that could be. Redheads was a condition that was often linked with vampires and
yeah,
witches in a lot of folklore.
it actually explicitly states in the Malleus Maleficarum that Kramer, I want to say, there's a guy who actually wrote it, and the other guy whose name got added to it, even though he had nothing to do with it, and he wasn't happy. And I want to say Kramer is the one who actually wrote it, but he comments
The guy from
that
Seinfeld.
that there's a certain type of redhead that all of them are vampires.
Oh yeah, the children of Judas.
Mm. Is
Yeah.
that actually, that's a good question, and you would know. So, is this whole idea that vampires are the children of Judas actually folklore?
There was a type of vampire that were considered to be the direct descendants of Judas. Some of it you go back with Lilith. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you get that story with her being the mother of demons and whatnot, and therefore the inceptor of all vampires.
And particularly the mother of succubi, which, as you very correctly said, are tightly associated with vampires.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of overlap. The Venn diagrams there are very close.
But no, that's really interesting because I've had people ask me before about the whole Judas connection, and I had always thought it was born out of the Dracula 2000 movie.
Oh no, it does go back a lot further than that. I'm not sure exactly how far, which is why I didn't. There's not a lot of information on the children of Judas
Mm.
as a folklore. Although they're supposed to have a mark on their neck with like the three X's,
Hmm.
for the 30 pieces of silver, like their bite.
Makes sense, and of course the whole they were Judas tried to hang himself.
Yeah, and supposedly Judas was a redhead.
I did not know that. I
Oh, really?
learned some new things from you today.
Oh, yeah, that's supposed to be the whole meaning behind the redheaded, you know,
Hmm.
people being evil and all that. It's supposed to come from Judas. Also, I guess it would also come down to the fact that it was so rare in so many cultures.
This is true.
Naturally, in Ireland and the Great Britain and all of that,
Scandinavia.
you don't get that folklore because the being red haired is so common.
Because remember as well that I actually just had this conversation on Facebook. Thor in Norse mythology is a redhead.
Ah,
Very
doesn't have
much. I mean, his
long
name,
claws.
his title in Norse mythology is Thor the Red. we associate him with having blonde hair because basically Marvel, when they originally started the Thor comic books, made a coloring error.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was supposed to have red hair.
That's neat.
Oh, and John French has joined us.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I
Hello.
can hear you. This is actually, I think, pretty good timing for this. Unless Brian has any particular objections, we can just open it up.
No, let's open it up because all I've got left is a bunch of stuff about the movies
Mhm.
and the books. I've got a bunch of bad vampire jokes.
Oh, good lord. Do they all suck?
Yes, they do. What's a vampire's favorite fruit? A nectarine. Yeah,
Yeah,
this is
that's an
my.
old bad vampire joke.
Oh, I know they're all old vampire jokes. They're terrible. That's my closing gag. To elicit comments and questions. Is I tell bad vampire jokes at the end.
Just like my usual closing comment is the ghost sex joke.
So, John, did you see any of my talk, or are you just joining? In the panel?
I'm just joining now. I've been working around the house.
Oh, okay.
And I was going to say,
Story.
Virgo commented, "Wow, look at John getting a special invite. Lol, just kidding." It's like, no, in point of fact, the plan was for this talk to naturally segue into a panel with a bunch of our fellow guests on vampires. So John fits right in where he's supposed to be. This isn't him just suddenly showing up out of the blue.
Right.
Of course, we may get more Big Ben chiming in.
Oh, right. Well,
Which is okay. I hadn't actually known, John, that you were in England.
no, that's actually a clock in my dining room.
Oh, okay.
I was joking because I was reading the Saving Marley story,
Yes.
which is set in London. So I was joking that was Big Ben.
I see now. And I know you're just kidding, Virgo. Somebody else might have been wondering, which is why I pointed that out.
No, but I thank you, Virgo, for joining in and actually watching.
Yeah, although I did want to finish, Teresa Holgove City Pagan, who is apparently a redhead, did want to point out, no, she doesn't steal someone's soul every time she gets a new freckle.
Oh, that'd be a
Of course,
lot.
if she did steal souls to get freckles, she would probably deny it.
True.
I mean, don't expect a vampire to. Well, present company is accepted when Baron joins us. You don't really expect the vampire to go around telling people he's a vampire.
Although nowadays it's the best way to keep your cover.
True.
The more you insist you're a vampire, the more people won't believe you.
I forget his name. There's a spy for that one I tracked down during World War II whose cover while working, I forget where, but he was a spy for the Allies against the Axis, and his cover was telling everybody who asked what he did for a living, "I'm a spy." Nobody believed him.
I thought he was going to say he was a vampire, but
There's probably been people who do that as well.
yeah.
And of course, Q, this is just making me think of one of my favorite vampire movies, Kiss of the Vampire with Nicolas Cage, and him running down the street going, "I'm a vampire, I'm a vampire."
Yeah.
So that might be a good question to start things off with. John and Brian, what is your favorite vampire movie?
My favorite vampire movie. I would have to say Not Dracula, but the one with Louis Jourdan as Dracula on PBS. I would think in 1977.
Count Dracula. That's what it was called.
Yes, very well done. It was one of the most the one I found close to what the book was. It had it had all the elements of the Stoker novel, and I haven't seen it in a long time, but I think it actually ended with a chase in Europe, trying to catch Dracula before he got back to Transylvania.
Nice.
Very nice.
Mine, I think we've discussed before, but I usually go with Interview with the Vampire. Just because it's all vampires and, you don't have pesky hunters and humans running around messing things up. It's just a vampire telling his own story.
Granted, as you well know, Brian, I hate Anne Rice's work so much.
No, but the movie was good.
I'll grant you, as much as I dislike her books, the movie is enjoyable.
I think I wasn't impressed with Anne Rice's books. I read a few of them. There was another vampire series. Can't remember the author, but the central character was the Count Saint Germain.
Oh, Chelsea Quinn Yarborough.
Right. I liked the first one, whatever the first one I read. I don't know if it was the first one in the series, but I found Saint Germain an interesting character, but he just seemed kind of a weak character when as compared to other protagonists. People he loved would get killed, and it was, oh, okay, she's dead. You expect someone like him to wreak some vengeance, for his for his loved ones.
Books were on the odd side.
I
Really
find
took the vampire ennui thing to an extreme.
I did like the bit where he could write two separate documents, each with one hand.
Nice.
And I think the historical Count Saint Germain actually was able to do that. He could simultaneously write two separate things, one with each hand.
Which raises the great question. Was he able to, or is he able to, given supposedly Count Saint Germain is still around?
Well, if he has, I haven't. He hasn't friended me on Facebook, so.
Nor me, sadly. Although, hey, Count Saint Germain, if you happen to be listening, let me know. I'd be happy to have you on the show.
That'd be a great interview.
Yeah. Whether he's a vampire or just an alchemist who found the Philosopher's Stone, either way.
Either way, yeah, it's a pretty good score.
Yeah. So I imagine Count Saint Germain, who found the Philosopher's Stone, reading the first Harry Potter book and going, yeah, right.
Well, no. Actually, J.K. Rowling deserves credit there.
Mm-hmm.
Because Nicholas Flamel, which is the one who creates it in the first book, actually is a real historical alchemist who did claim to have created the Philosopher's Stone. Oh
no! I mean, I give J.K. Rowling all the credit in the world, and she deserves every penny of royalties that she gets because she got a whole generation reading again.
Yeah, absolutely true. It's like I just like it when I see an author who did their homework.
Mm.
Oh, right.
And I have to give her credit for Flamel and the fact that it's like, no, there actually was a Nicholas Flamel. Granted, as far as I know, he's not still around either.
Well, if he found the Philosopher's Stone, he might be.
If he did, he should be like Bill Gates or something because he should be rich.
He's living under an assumed name.
Yep,
There's
Bill Gates.
Jeff Bezos.
Quite possibly. There's another interesting figure that actually I've just started to come across in my readings. Have either of you ever heard of Doug Kippel?
No.
Brian?
No.
Okay, so Doug Kippel was a German alchemist who did a lot of very strange experiments trying to create a philosopher's stone. And one of the other, you guys probably know this, but some of our listeners may not. The three great goals of alchemy are turning base metals into more valuable ones, so lead into gold, eternal life, and creating new life. So Doug Kippel supposedly was trying to create his own life in Germany. And here's where this gets interesting. He lived at a specific castle in Germany, and he was born at this castle. So while he was not actually a member of the family, he would from time to time refer to himself by the castle's name and say that I am the Frankensteiner.
Well, Patrick Thomas is working on a series of books, none of which have been published yet, but he calls them Agents of the Abyss.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all the great and not so great fictional monsters who are in public domain. And he asked me to, following a discussion of one of his characters is Adam Frankenstein. He's written stories about Adam Frankenstein before, and in a discussion about Mary Shelley's book, long story short, he now has a 60,000 word novel from me, which sort of retells the Frankenstein story. May the ghost of Mary Shelley forgive me. But in reading and rereading and then rereading the novel Frankenstein, they're all in the novel. Victor Frankenstein actually refers to his education, his early reading, which was of the early philosophers and alchemists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when he goes to school, when he finally goes to university, he's basically told, throw that crap away, start reading real science.
Yeah.
Which relates to the great question of how did he create the monster? Everyone's usual reaction is, well, lightning, because of the Boris Karloff movie. The implication is actually a lot more alchemy.
Right. That he never really quite. Mary Shelley never really quite explains what and how he created the monster. It was with a creature, but there was no lightning involved. Not until I started writing and Pat insisted on lightning. Because what's Frankenstein without the lightning?
Somebody's phone is going off.
Not mine. I muted mine.
Shame on you, Brian. But no, and of course, this all, for those of you listening that don't know, this does in fact relate because of the famous story of where both the novel Frankenstein and the very first vampire novel in English literature came from. John, do you know the story?
No, but are you the first vampire novel in British literature? Would that be Varney the Vampire?
Nope, it's actually older than Varney.
Yeah.
It would be John Polidori's The Vampire.
Oh, right. Right.
So this happened in 1816. Or do I have that right? Let me look.
Earlier, I think.
Later, I'm in the middle of something.
It was either 1816.
Yeah, sorry.
Year Without a Summer. No, actually, it was in fact 1816, also known as the Year Without a Summer, the poverty year 1800, and froze to death. Because what happened was in 1815, Mount Tambora erupted, and it kicked so much volcanic ash into the air. 1816 was basically a nuclear winter. During 1816, a group of friends, which would include Lord George Gordon Byron and Percy Shelley, And of course, Mary Wollstonecraft, who was at the time Percy's fiance but not his wife, along with Claire Claremont, who was the sister of Mary, or half sister of Mary, excuse me, and John Polidori, the personal physician to Lord Byron, all got together in Switzerland on Lake Geneva with the plan of having boating and picnics and things of that nature. The problem was, as I said, it was the year without a summer. Instead of having a summer and nice, lovely weather, it rained and stormed and thunder and lightning, and they couldn't go outside. They got stuck inside.
It sounds like when I went to Ocean City last August.
But on a rainy night, they were sitting in the library taking turns reading from a book called Phantasmagoria, which was a French translation of a German book of ghost stories. Byron was bored by the stories, and he said, let's write our own. Byron started what's known as fragment of a novel. He got bored and he never finished it, which was a story about a vampire. Polidori picked up that fragment of a novel and wrote The Vampire. And the reason why I made the joke with Brian that Lord Byron himself was a vampire is, in point of fact, the first literary vampire, Lord Vertuven, is very obviously based on Byron.
Yes. Not a flattering portrait either.
No. And then Percy Shelley got bored with the whole idea and didn't actually write anything. Claire Claremont never wrote anything. And on one rainy afternoon, Mary Shelley began to write Frankenstein. So I always find the story fascinating because you have a meeting of two of the greatest literary minds of the Romantic era, Lord Byron and Percy Shelley. They're both rightly famous for the work that they've done. But instead of them coming up with some great work, it was one guy's doctor who wrote a handful of other books, and the fiance of one of the other ones, who it was her second book that she had written, who invented the science fiction genre.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also just fascinating as well. She wrote a few more books. The only other one that's well known, in fact, I've even seen people say she only wrote 2 books, one of which being Frankenstein and the other one being The Last Man on Earth, which basically started the apocalyptic genre. But she actually wrote, I want to say, around 8 books. But before Frankenstein, she wasn't a well-known writer. Her mother, of course, was a very important writer because the original Mary Wollstonecraft was basically the first true feminist author, and then who unfortunately would die in 2 days after Mary was born from complications due to having a natural home birth.
Yeah. There's actually a book that I just read. It is about the history of printing. It's called, I believe it's called Printer's Error, and it talks about who was Gutenberg. The funny thing is the person who criticized Gutenberg and who was an advocate of handwriting books made a lot of arguments against the same kind of arguments you hear about hard copy books versus Kindle. Mm-hmm. Is actually more historically documented than Gutenberg himself, there's basically no historical documentation about Gutenberg other than he printed books, like the first person to print books. Yeah. But there is an entire chapter about Mary Wollstonecraft. Wollstonecraft, yeah. However, there is a really good very good chapter about Benjamin Franklin.
I'm going to have to check this out.
That man was a badass.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
When he went into printing, he made sure to economically destroy his competitors.
This just reminds me, there's an old idea a friend of mine gave me I've been meaning to work on, which was a radio drama style comedy in the vein of whatchamacallit? Not the Goodfellas. The Odd Couple. What dealing historically accurately, because this did in fact happen, with the time that Benjamin Franklin and John Adams spent living together in France as America's ambassadors, and the fact that Ben, being Ben, was having the time of his life because he was a womanizer, he was a drunk. So 18th century France was Benjamin Franklin's playground. But John Adams, who was pretty much a Puritan, was miserable. He hated France. He hated having to live with Ben. He wanted to go home. And it's just such an obvious area for comedy. But again, so many great ideas, so little free time. Oh, I also did want to say, I just heard back from Dacre. He's unfortunately 4 hours from home, so no, he will not be joining us tonight.
Yeah, I saw the message.
Yeah, so it came up on mine too.
Well, I also
it's unfortunate.
I figured, but let everybody else, the people listening know. It is unfortunate. I would have loved to have him take part of this, but I think we'll have a good time regardless. John, if you want to maybe poke Pat and see if he's available.
Okay, let me go poke Pat and be right back.
Yeah, I'm going to go poke the Baron as well.
Okay.
So I'm going to mute. And Brian, jangle keys or something to keep people entertained.
Welcome to the Vampire Panel. Okay, here we go.
I don't see any jangling keys, Brian.
You missed them.
But you're supposed to keep jangling them until we got back.
I was welcoming people to the panel.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Okay. Consider Pat poked.
Thank you. And Baron lost track of time, and he's getting on with that. Well, the other upside is that we are the last thing, not only of the day, but of the convention, which means we can keep going as long as we're all good going, and then I can wrap it up.
Okay. Well, since we are talking vampires, let me ask a question to everybody. What was the first vampire movie that you saw? Mine was the local library, Enoch Pratt Branch 13, which was on my way home from school. Had a series of films once a week for kids my age, and the very first vampire movie I saw at the tender, 7th or 8th grade was the silent movie Nosferatu.
Oh wow!
Oh,
Nice.
What a good choice!
Good one.
Yes.
Yeah. Mine was the Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Once Bitten, Jim Carrey.
Oh yes.
Dracula, the original one with Bela Lugosi, was mine.
That's probably the next one I saw because I used to watch the Saturday afternoon creature features.
Yes. I did see my next one was Dracula with Bela Lugosi. Friday night about 10, 11 o'clock on one of our local stations would run. The host was Sir Graves Ghastly, and he would run all the classic and not so classic horror movies.
Nice. Well, I always remember it was a big deal for me that PBS in Pennsylvania every year on Thanksgiving, all day long, from early in the morning until late, far past my bedtime, because I was a kid at the time, would just run old movies, all the Draculas, the Wolfmans, Frankenstein, and they'd always have to drag me away from the TV to go do for Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah, unfortunately, back then well, put this way, back when I was at home, well, my parents' house eating Thanksgiving dinner and everything else. The whole idea of being able to videotape a TV show was science fiction.
Yep.
So if
Yeah.
you missed it, you missed it.
The
Okay.
good old days.
I'm also
Yeah.
just
Wasn't that long ago.
thinking of one person I think deserves a lot of credit. Is it was actually Mr. Rogers who fought in Congress to get the right to tape television.
Yeah. Red Skelton was heavily involved in that because he wanted to, investing into technology because he didn't want his TV shows to be forgotten.
And not to mention all the wonderful lack of censorship that recorded media allowed us to have access to. Thank you,
Yes.
George Carlin.
Well, the nice thing about PBS is that there was, from the time I was growing up, there was a remarkable lack of censorship. There were, there was not so much, graphic nudity or profanity, but yes, there was profanity and there was some nudity, which up at the time you did not see on television.
Yes. During a time when nothing was really considered profane because nobody bothered to be profane. Lord help us all.
Yeah, don't mind me. I'm just sharing this to Facebook. Try to get folks over here. Since again, this is sadly the last thing before the ending ceremony. So it'd be nice to have people join in to see us out, as it were.
If I can propose another topic, bad vampire movies.
Oh yes.
God.
And I'm one of those ones who I will freely admit I went to the theater to see The Fearless Vampire Hunters, or pardon me, but your teeth are in my neck, with Sharon Tate.
Yeah,
I've never seen that, but I have heard of it.
It's as bad as it sounds.
I was gonna say I can't remember for the life of me the name of the movie, but there was a TV movie that was done a while back. Or by a while back, I mean like the 80s, 90s. So for some of our listeners, that may be ancient history. For me, that was I was in high school. But I don't. The only main detail I remember about it is it took place in Eastern Europe, and the vampires had this thing where their tongue would like open up into this weird prickly thing that they'd use to bite to stick into people's necks to suck out the blood.
Blade 2.
No, Daughters of Darkness.
That's the one.
Oh. I was about to say, just as bad.
Yeah, and if you saw my presentation, that actually comes from some folklore with the vampires having a stinger in their tongue.
Yep, you did point that out.
Yeah, it's one of the very few movies to ever bother to use that.
Well, it's creepy.
It is, but at least in my opinion, in the Daughters of Darkness, the special effect just didn't work.
No, that was the one with Anthony Perkins, right?
It could have been. I don't remember.
Well, they do say some of us have some rather forked tongues to put to good use.
Chibi Dice Botch has also pointed out, and I haven't seen this one, but I've heard this said before, that Life Force was a bad vampire movie.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Space vampires.
Vampires.
I've never seen it, but given what I heard about the lack of costuming on the leading lady, I don't think those who watched it really cared.
Again, no argument.
That was pretty
man.
great to see the movie.
Yeah.
I have to say,
wow.
and I'm curious of everyone else's opinion, but for sheer fun, in my opinion, one of the greatest monster movies, and it's not just a vampire movie, has got to be the 1980s Monster Squad.
Oh, that's a great film.
I just saw a thing on that. Actually, it was like 10 things you didn't know about the Monster Squad.
I've seen that. I think I've seen that video.
Yeah, Minty, the Australian guy.
Yeah. John, did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say, must confess, I haven't seen it.
Oh, John, it is a great collab of all the great silver screen monsters of the day. You can't go wrong with it. It's beautiful.
Especially if you just want to talk about someone playing Count Dracula, because it isn't some Dracula knockoff, it's Dracula, who's just having fun with every moment of his performance. To use a popular colloquialism, there is no piece of scenery in that movie that doesn't have that actor's fang marks on it, because he chewed it all.
Bogus. Frickin' Frankenstein looking at a plastic mask and just going, bogus.
Yes.
Oh, man.
It
that
was
whole
cheesy,
film.
but it just embraced the cheese.
No, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the film, embraced the cheese in the most horrible way.
Oh yeah, that was the bad one.
God rest Rutger Hauer.
Seen Buffy the movie?
Have I?
Yes.
No.
Really?
No. The funny thing is, I write horror. I have edited horror. But to be honest, I don't watch all that much horror.
I got a question for John. Yay.
Okay.
Yay. What can you say if you legitimately wanted to make someone experience fear? Not horror, per se. Not a hint of scare, but legitimately have to stop reading, close the book, and turn on the lights.
Are you talking about a book that I read or what I would do?
What you would do.
I would write a book called I would write a story called Choice of Damnations.
Oh.
In which basically the premise and it's in my book, Monsters Among Us, in which a terrorist group is attacking Baltimore, and the opening scene is there's a home invasion. A man is told if he doesn't take his car, which has been filled with explosives, and detonate it somewhere in Baltimore designed to cause the most casualties, his family is going to be killed in the most horrible way. And he has to choose between killing a large number of strangers or having his family killed. And he's only the first one to be given this choice. Pat Thomas says it's the scariest thing I've ever written, and there's absolutely nothing supernatural about it.
I've read the story. In fact, John, as you may or may not remember, when we first had you on the show, you were very gracious enough to share it a little early, under the promise that we not share it around to others, which I haven't. I'm quite sure that my co-host at the time has not either. But it is an incredibly good story. And yeah, it's extremely unsettling.
Now,
I dig it.
Yeah. As far as the book that caused, I said I don't read horror now, but that didn't always exist. The book that caused me to put it down and not be able to get back to it for a week or two was Stephen King's Cemetery Dance. That was very upsetting.
Pet Sematary?
Pet Sematary. Hi, Pat. Pet Cemetery Dance is a magazine. Pet Cemetery is the story.
Okay.
And we can welcome Patrick Thomas, who's joined us.
Hi, everybody.
Pat,
Welcome aboard, my friend.
Pat, tell them about your famous or infamous vampire story that was in the anthology. You know, the one that everybody writes it.
I co-edited a vampire anthology with Diane Rach called New Blood, and it's from Padwell Publishing. And Diane and I had a lovely little story in there. And I know all the vampire anthologies have a story like this, but we thought we could do something new with it. It was a cannibalistically incestuous vampire penguin from Coney Island. Like I said, they all have those, but we thought we could do something new with it.
You see the look on my face.
I do.
Vampire penguin.
Incestuous vampire penguin.
I was
Yeah.
about to say that's an important part.
No, incestuously cannibalistic.
I'm not gonna lie. It sounds like something that somebody would create for a D&D campaign. And yes, I'm looking at you, Kevin.
I can neither confirm nor deny I've ever done anything remotely like that. Or that I might do it in the
It's
future.
a fun story, and it actually all ends up making perfect sense. The title is entirely accurate, but perhaps not in the way that many people might take it at first.
GB Dice Botch has commented, that sounds like cat people as vampires.
They aren't?
It sounds perfect. Sorry.
Oh,
I think that's
Christ.
mostly a commentary on the.
I would be sea lying to you if I said it wasn't.
There's the somewhat infamous Stephen King movie, Sleepwalkers. I'm thinking that's what they're referring to.
Frick.
Yeah, bad movie.
That was a bad movie, yeah. You want to what? Here's the question. I've got 3 vampiric authors on this thing. I hate to do it to you, Kevin, but I gotta ask, guys, if you had to guess there's somebody famous right now in the media, who would you think is a vampire in secret? You guys are the experts. And what type of vampire are they? Because I know they all come in different shapes and sizes.
I don't know. Tom Cruise hasn't aged much.
Well, they said the same thing about Dick Clark for a long time too.
That's true, but Tom Cruise has a series of like victims, behind him that you can sort of trace and just watch him feeding off their aging.
Well,
So you're saying
if I may,
he joined a cult that procures victims for him?
Yeah,
if I may, the last couple, I haven't seen too many of Tom Cruise's movies lately, but he definitely sucked the life out of a couple of them.
Yes, that was a collective groan.
Yes, thank you very much for that.
All right, well, how about instead of those, they appear immortal? Because they could just as easily just be immortal.
Hold on, I want to answer that question, though.
Okay.
Because you've all overlooked the obvious answer.
Nicolas Cage?
Cage. We have a picture of him from the 19th century.
well, Keanu Reeves as well.
True.
There's a picture of Eddie Murphy from the 20s.
You're sure that wasn't from the movie he did set in the 20s?
No, what a Harlem Nights. This dude was rocking a classic, like the straw block hat kind of deal going on. The whole nine.
He did. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I want to say Harlem Nights, but that might be it. Had
It
Matt
is.
Fox in it. And
Yeah.
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 Oh, you're going to shoot me in my pinky toe. Oh,
course.
man.
Dice Botch has also pointed out Gary Oldman would be a Psy-Vamp.
If Gary Oldman is a Psy-Vamp, then so is, what the frick is his name? Played the Green Goblin in the first Spider-Man film. Willem Dafoe.
Yeah.
Okay?
Let's face it, Gary Oldman isn't a vampire, but if he needs to drain some life energy to stay young, he can act like a vampire so well that he might as well be one. Because he's that much of a method actor.
Oh, my God. I just
If he
realized.
was a vampire, they wouldn't go into show business.
There is one. There is one that I think we're overlooking. Keith
This one?
Richards.
No,
He's just immortal.
I think he's a zombie. I think he died. I think he died 10 years ago, and he just doesn't realize it.
The Revenant.
The music is just so good it keeps him going.
What about Betty White, for that matter?
Oh. Imagine if Betty White is legitimately a demon. Every
That would
single
explain a
time.
lot.
Yeah,
So
every single.
as opposed to the illegitimate demons.
Yeah, every single time a sitcom star dies, Betty White is allowed a year longer on Earth.
Well, I mean, they had the same thing for George Burns there ages ago. I mean, he got a ridiculous amount of money to perform at a casino on his 100th birthday. And they knew well that he may not make it, and he didn't. But he got 7 figures to perform on his birthday, 100th birthday.
Well, let's be clear though. We know what George Burns was. He's not a vampire.
He's God.
He's God and Satan at the same time, because he played them both.
Yeah, but then again, so's Morgan Freeman. Every single time he tells a story, another freckle on his face appears. That's why he narrates everybody's life.
Well, with my character Dagonet, he did vaudeville. He's been around since Camelot. He's the infinite jester, and he had the opportunity to go into movies, but foresaw that being a problem. Although he does admit he was in one movie because he and Negro were on the run and needed some money. It was a Laurel and Hardy movie, and actually, as I was watching it, a character walked by in a prison scene that was about Dagonet's height with a beard, and I'm like, okay, he was in this movie. Only the other characters could be Negro because he's a normal-looking guy. But I wrote down the time in the movie where he appears somewhere in one of my notebooks. But knowing that he would have to keep going, he didn't want to appear on the screen because that would make it much harder.
He just accidentally got caught as he walked past.
Yeah, like oh crap, cameras.
He was an extra.
Yeah. I still love that idea.
When I do work it into the thing, if someone actually goes and watches the movie, he's in it. So, or someone close enough,
I'm gonna have to watch the movie now, obviously. Which, in terms of vampires, of course, obviously brings up, well, not Laurel and Hardy, but Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein.
Yep.
So you're saying Laurel and Hardy were actually vampires?
No. I think they took one look at them, and I think a vampire took one look at them and was like, pass.
Yeah. This actually makes me think of a joke a friend of mine makes. So you guys, everyone here, I know, whether because I know you personally, and for that matter, the writers, I know you know them from your writing, is familiar with Lovecraft's works.
Yes.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
Smart Alec. But I have a friend who has proposed, specifically in the context of a role-playing game, but it kind of works in general. The one group of people that could go up against Cthulhu and not lose their minds, they might actually be able to out crazy Cthulhu. The Marx Brothers.
Yeah.
Or Jim Carrey.
I always figured, if you're doing cartoon characters, the Animaniacs would beat everybody. They could just make Galactus or whoever their very special friend.
Yep.
And they win.
All you need is Paulson.
We're channeled by the Animaniacs, so
yeah. And all you need is Paulson to show up in a either a Pinky mask or a Yakko Warner costume and just go, United States, Canada, Mexico, Panama, Haiti, Jamaica, Peru.
Or for that matter, we're in the vein. If you want animated characters that could own Cthulhu and Company, Elmira.
Oh God, no!
Take you home. How's you make
another one. Imagine if Elmira met the abominable snowman. They would both be trying to hug one another.
Yeah, but that hasn't happened, Yeti.
Oh, George, you have a funny voice. You have a funny sense of humor, George.
If we're talking Animaniacs, has anybody heard of what's the music group? There's Postmodern Jukebox.
Yes.
They do a version of Pinky and the Brain in which they're bartenders in the background, and they are the two people who voiced Pinky and the Brain in the cartoons.
Paulson and oh yeah.
And they actually do so what are we going to do tonight, Pinky? That they actually do the bit in the song.
Nice.
So it's and the singer actually ends the song with Marf. So
Beautiful.
I will just when this is all over, when this is over, go to Google and Google Postmodern Jukebox Pinky and the Brain.
I'm going to be doing that.
I got another Pinky in the Brain one. Both of the voice actors showed up on a Nostalgia Critic episode, and at the end of the episode, Brain curses out and rips Pinky apart for always screwing up every single one of his plans. I mean, he goes full Pesci on him in an argument. It's so beautiful in voice and character. So after you watch Bradley, after you watch the Postmodern Jukebox, you got to check that out too. Because dear God, it's hilarious. Hearing Orson Welles' voice just ripping Pinky apart, going, "You are a complete idiot. I can't believe how many effing times I've had to," and I'm not saying he said effing, I'm saying he said the full words, going right off on him. It was beautiful.
Except, of course, the thing that people have to understand about Pinky and the Brain is that when the song says one is a genius and the other is insane, Pinky is the genius. He's the only one of the two of them.
I've heard that.
But here's the thing. There's one episode in which the world is successfully taken over. Pinky throws a birthday bash for Brain, invites all the major world leaders, and gets them all to agree that Brain should be the new undisputed world ruler. And then Brain's the one who screws it up.
Well,
Actually, I'm trying to remember, and Wacko's Wish, which was like after the Animaniacs, they like give everyone like Mindy's mom. She finally says, "Okay, Mama, love you," and "Okay, Daddy," and then Buttons are going, "Oh, Buttons, what a good dog!" So like everyone gets the final recognition because Animaniacs had been over at that point, and they just made a Christmas movie. I'm trying to remember. Did Pinky and the Brain actually get to keep? Take over the world and keep it? They're giving everyone their wish.
You think.
That seems to be the obvious answer.
I only saw it once, so.
If I can get back on if we can get back on topic, we've already talked about the first vampire movie. What about the best vampire novel you've read? I will give props to Stephen King for Salem's Lot.
That's a good one.
Salem's Lot was really good.
There was a tween novel that I read in the 6th grade that was interesting. Because here's the funny thing. There are two that I can say legitimately got me into vampirism. The first one was a book called The Silver Kiss, which was two vampires fighting over the affection of a woman. It was one of those like weird, cheesy teen novels. And I was in the 6th grade when I read it, so ugh. And then there was another one that was a kind of a twisted modern take on it that was called The World on Blood by John Nassau. And it didn't treat vampires like they were supernatural beings, but that for some reason they were people with a specific type of predilection where blood didn't cause an adverse effect when it was ingested, but in fact had a very narcotic effect on them. Hallucinogenic, you name it. And it's centered around somebody that basically was going to AA meetings. to try and like stop
read
their
that.
consistent hunger
read
for it. It's a great book.
Hi, my name's Vlad, and I'm a vampire. Hi, Vlad.
Vampires.
Right?
How about you, Brian? What's your favorite?
Oh, it's really tough. It's probably changed over the years.
Which is fair.
I really liked Salem's Lot. I really liked the Vampire Lestat. Because I read it when I was very young, so I was sort of very open to it. You know, it was much better written than Interview with the Vampire. But I Am Legend is another really great one.
Oh, yes.
Wonderful. One of these days they'll make a good movie of it.
Yeah, one of
Someday.
these things. They almost did. They almost did. They almost got the ending right, and then the studio
You mean
insisted they changed
The
it.
Will Smith version. The original ending is actually quite good.
Yeah. You know, I
Patrick,
love.
how about you? I'm sorry, John. I didn't mean
Go
to.
ahead. Go ahead, Pat.
It's changed over the years. When I was a kid, Bunnicula, you know, instead of the ones that were we mentioned for kids.
first one I owned?
I loved Bunnicula.
The best one I've read lately is not even a traditional novel. It's American Vampire by Scott Snyder, and I'm blanking on the artist. It's a series of graphic novels which I just really thought did well and enjoyed. And Stephen King liked it enough that he asked to co-write the first issue. So
wow.
it must have been a decent job there. But I mean, one of the ones that jumps to mind is, in terms of series, and it's different, is the Anita Blake Vampire Hunters before she jumped the shark. And by jumping, I mean, you know, the shark.
Jumping in the sexual sense.
Had sex with the shark.
Yeah. Anita Blake jumped the shark in one of the books.
Yeah.
In the sexual sense, yes.
That's a wonderful series. And I mean, she's still a good writer, but for me, it veered off in a different direction than I wanted to read.
Yeah, the nature.
Mind you, she's good enough. I read 6 more books. Like, you know, a lot of people trash, and I don't want to say you trigger anybody with this, Twilight and the like, but I admire the heck out of anybody who can get that many people to like their book. I mean,
I could tell you why that took off. That didn't take off because of good story quality. It took off because it was pandering to an audience. That's all it was doing.
But I
could be worth 50 million and pander an audience. I'd pander well, but I give credit that someone could pull that off.
Give her credit as well, just like J.K. Rowling, and the fact, like it or not, she's gotten people reading, and that's always a good thing.
No, I can't argue that.
And then 50 Shades of Grey was Twilight fanfic.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
John,
then she made more. So the next big thing will be 50 Shades of Grey fanfic.
Yeah.
I have a story involving Pat, Twilight, and an anthology where we were in called Flesh and Iron.
I know it.
Way back, the first Balticon where I was selling books. C.J. Henderson graciously gave me part of his table so I could sell books. Well, Pat and I we knew each other, but we weren't the friends we are now. That came when I gave him a box of burger cookies. But he says, John, I have a panel. Can you watch my table? So, like me, he had copies of Flesh and Iron on the table. And this sweet young thing walks over to the table, looks at Flesh and Iron, which had a remarkably good cover, and said, you know, what's this about? And I told her, you know, supernatural detectives, vampires, and people chained up. And she said, oh, are these the vampires like in Twilight? And I looked at her and said, no, these are real vampires.
Yes.
And she walked away. Sorry, Pat, I caused you sale.
That's all right. Although I will say my story and the rest of the anthology was built around the novella, but Diane Wrights and I wrote our story in there, and we were nominated, and I never found out if we won. I just got the notification for the most twisted the sex scene in literature. And I don't usually write that type of book, but it was an honor to be nominated. We're up against Laurel King Hamilton and some other people. So just to be nominated was an honor. I never
to answer John's question for myself, it's stereotypical, but if I have to pick my favorite vampire novel of all time, I gotta go with Dracula.
Can't argue with the classics.
I will say this. I also greatly enjoy the earlier Anita Blake books. No disrespect to Laurel K. Hamilton's talent as a writer, but I'm just not into the softcore enough to enjoy the later ones. I'll say another one that I've been reading recently is by Paul W. Wilson. I want to say he's the guy who wrote the Keep.
Repairman Jack.
What?
He writes the Repairman Jack books,
Yes,
right?
that's the author. He wrote a novel I've been reading lately called Midnight Mass, which is an actual vampire apocalypse story.
Yes, very good, very good. I actually read. It was a short story that he expanded into a novel, and I read the short story, and it was wonderful.
That's how I found it. I'm running a RPG called Night's Black Agents, where it's spies versus vampires. And it's like I was looking for an idea for my campaign, and I remembered reading that short story. It's like, it's such a good short story. Did he ever do anything else with it? And that's when I found out about the novel.
Mm.
And there's actually several novels in that universe. I want to say, and I hope I don't get the name of the novel wrong, I believe the first one was The Keep, and it's people fighting Nazis and vampires. Or maybe it was Nazis fighting vampires.
It was Nazis. It was Nazis fighting vampires, because I remember buying that at Walden's bookstore. The tagline, the description on the back, in which the German commander sends. He's in this castle, and he sends word to his superiors, "We need help. Something is killing my men."
Mm.
And there were definitely two words. Not something is killing my men, but something is killing my men. It was interesting because if you had to pick a good guy in the in that novel, it was the German Nazi commander.
Yep.
I've been meaning to read that because Midnight Mass, according to Wilson himself in the introduction to Midnight Mass, it's meant he wanted to write a vampire story because he didn't see The Keep as a vampire story. But The Keep is extremely well known. I keep meaning to read that myself. It just sounds amazing.
It's in the same universe. It predates the apocalypse, but they're all tied together.
I had known that the Repairman Jack novels tied into The Keep. I hadn't known that Midnight had as well.
Hmm.
But that's very cool.
Yeah. Interesting takes.
Yeah.
Definitely interesting takes on the species.
It's also the thing I kind of like with Midnight Mass, and this is a big part of where George Romero got his idea for Night of the Living Dead is I Am Legend by Graham Matheson. He has admitted this much in interviews. So it's kind of cool to see the undead apocalypse genre go back to its roots, as it were.
Hmm.
Isn't the Omega Man an adaptation of I Am Legend?
Right. It was Charlton Heston, and it was one of the few movies that was so bad I just walked out of it.
It was pretty bad.
Wow.
It was 70s-tastic.
I just could not take any more. I love the novel. I love the whole idea of, without spoiling it, why the book was called I Am Legend.
Yeah.
It is an absolutely brilliant novel.
Yes. And
the Price version is a pretty good movie adaptation.
I would like to share with everybody the creepiest vampire scene I have ever seen.
Please do.
Oh.
It was a Simpsons Treehouse of Horrors, and it started out as a parody of Twilight, but Homer Simpson and I think someone else was driving through an unknown part of Springfield, which is where all the vampires hung out. It was every classic vampire there was. Bela Lugosi's Dracula, Nosferatu, Dracula from the Dracula from Francis Ford Coppola's movie, and there was Count Von Count sucking the blood out of Big Bird's neck.
Oh God!
You know what happened?
Yeah.
2 liters.
Yes, but it was just undeniably creepy, and it freaked. My daughter was watching it with me, and given what I did for a living, she was not easily creeped out, but she just had to leave the room.
It sounds like a gathering that you and me usually have, Brian, once a month. No?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Something else to look up on YouTube is Simpsons Vampire episode.
You see, I think of Simpsons Vampire episode, I think of the most hilarious interaction in a Treehouse of Horrors involving it was when Homer staked Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns starts to freak out, turns to dust. He's like, thank God that's over. And Burns comes back just enough to say, "You're fired." And then back to dust.
Which also just reminds me, John, I know you haven't seen it, but Brian and Barrett have, and perhaps Patrick has as well. Pee Wee Herman's role in the Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie. The vampire who just won't die.
His death scene is hilarious. It's the best part of the movie.
And it's one of the early stingers, because they come back in the credits to him still dying from being staked in the heart.
It's me. I am that vampire. I can't die.
Which is also, of course, led to the joke that Pee Wee Herman was a better vampire than Twilight.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
They should have had him guest star on Buffy, the TV show.
They should have.
I could see that.
Okay. Another vampire movie for discussion, Love at First Bite.
Oh,
Haven't seen it in many years, unfortunately.
Is that Nicolas Cage?
no.
George Hamilton.
Hamilton.
Oh, George Hamilton. Thank you. Yeah.
And Richard Benjamin.
And they try to eat him. They're like, "Ooh, chicken!" And he's a bat. They gotta catch him and eat him.
And what was the first line? He's being kicked out of his Transylvanian castle by the communist government. They want to turn it into a training facility for women gymnasts. And as he's leaving, the crowd is basically, yelling at him. And this one man comes up to Dracula and he goes, "You bit my mother." "I bit your mother and your grandmother."
Which just makes me think of a very great TV series. Have any of you ever seen Young Dracula?
I've seen Young Frankenstein, but not Young Dracula.
Young Dracula is a BBC series about how Dracula gets driven out of Transylvania by angry mobs with pitchforks, so he moves to suburbia in London.
What a shock.
With his daughter and his son. And it's great, partly just because of the son is a vampire, but he wants to be a normal human. But while Dracula, of course, he is my son, he is my firstborn, he must inherit the family title. Well, of course,
something.
In stereotypical fashion, the daughter is actually the one who's the real vampire. The one who loves it, embraces it, and daddy doesn't care because she's a girl. But one of the things that's the most memorable about the series that I love is whenever Dracula gets pissed off, you get he'll step forward, there'll be a flash of light and a peal of thunder. And it's done to the point of being way overdone just for the humor factor.
Actually, just for some reason, you're talking about that, just popped in my head. Dracula is killed, and he comes back reincarnated as a car. Vlad the Impala. I don't know
Yes.
why it popped into my head.
Oh my God.
There's a meme of that.
Most hilarious damn line ever uttered in a film involving vampires was just 3 words uttered by Leslie Nielsen as a bat in a high-pitched voice. Renfield, you asshole!
Dracula dead and loving it.
Yes.
No, my favorite line from that movie was when they're talking about all the people he killed, and he just looks at him and goes, "They had it coming." Just the calmness, the way he says it. Actually, he delivered that line perfectly.
Although I just thought of, if you want to talk about bad vampire movies, Dracula Untold.
Oh God, yes, it should have stayed untold.
Yes.
Another bad vampire movie, Van Helsing.
Yes.
Although I did like the exploding vampire babies.
Van Helsing was a bad movie, but at least it was a fun movie.
Through count to 3. Oh no.
I will not argue that Van Helsing was a good movie. It really wasn't. But I enjoyed Van Helsing.
Yes, we all wanted to see Bono in full-blown emo gear walking upside down. That was all kinds of want. Yes.
Well, I'd also say I enjoyed the Frankenstein's monster.
Mm.
And particularly depicting him as highly intelligent, well-spoken, which is how he is in the novel.
Well, not for nothing. I mean, if you're going to talk about highly intelligent Frankenstein, then you got to think of De Niro.
Grant,
In
also a good
Frankenstein.
movie.
De Niro gets a lot of guff for that, but he was actually very good.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he was. It's again, people forget that if you read the novel Frankenstein, the monster quotes Milton, the monster quotes the Bible, Shakespeare. He's an intelligent, well-spoken. He's hideous looking, but he is not an idiot.
That's why I like Penny Dreadful.
Mhm.
And actually, the true story of Frankenstein's monster will be coming out in the Agents of the Abyss series by John French with a little bit of help from myself. It's Frankenstein retold from the monster's point of view.
There you go.
Well, it's told from both. Well, actually, yes, it's told from the monster's point of view. It's just that there's more than one monster in the book.
Yes. It's Monsters of the Abyss.
There you go.
I will tell Pat now. He doesn't know how close I came to having Victor Frankenstein actually be the monster. He committed all the crime. There's a novel there in which Victor Frankenstein is committing all the crimes that he ascribes to his creation, but it's sort of like another personality.
Mhm.
Wow.
And
Yeah,
just remember, if you're reading Frankenstein, what you're reading is an account by a ship's captain who's failed in his mission, retelling what the dying Victor Frankenstein had told him.
Yeah.
And any actions and all the narrative from the creature's point of view was filtered through Victor Frankenstein's point of view. So it's told by one person who is a highly unreliable witness.
Yep.
Fred Saberhagen did the Frankenstein. What was it? The Frankenstein tape?
Diaries or Frankenstein tape?
Something like that. There was the Dracula tape and the Frankenstein
Something.
file or something where he did something similar to that, where he went in and told the story from the monster's point of view, and you found out that the story was completely not what had been represented in the original novel.
Even in the novel, the creature he's hardly a saint. He does wind up killing Victor's bride, but
Allegedly,
we have the real
yeah, my point being that, at least from the novel's point of view, that's the big crime he commits. A lot of the time, he is as much a victim as he is a monster. In my opinion and many other people's opinion, this is hardly shocking. The monster of the story, Frankenstein, is Victor Frankenstein. It's not Adam or whatever you want to call, or the Fiend or all the other names that are given to the creature.
And Agents of the Abyss, he is Adam, because Mary Shelley did refer to him as such, just not in the book.
Well, no, actually, there is a point where he is referred to Frankenstein. The creator calls him "You are my Adam," so it is a perfectly legitimate name for the monster.
And he does take the name Frankenstein. So in Agents of the Abyss, the monster is also Frankenstein. So that solves everyone. It's the monster, not it's the doctor, not the monster. In this case, it's both.
Actually, even in the novel, he does say that the name, it's his father's name. It's as good as any for him, or something to that effect.
Yeah. Like I said, over the past, when I was writing it, I probably read and reread Frankenstein several times. And while he is in the forest, practicing self-isolation, he reads the Bible, he reads Milton, and he questions himself whether or not he is Adam or Satan or both.
It's all a question of when he gets cast out. Satan was cast out of heaven long before Adam and Eve showed up.
This is true.
Yes, and just like Adam and Eve, just like Lucifer, Adam was, he was cast out by his father, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think one of the best names I've seen proposed for the monster is from Dean Kuntz, who had the monster refer to himself as Deucalion, which is the name of the son of Prometheus. Which is very in keeping with the themes of the novel, since Mary Shelley, of course, called the story Frankenstein a modern Prometheus.
Yeah.
There were two very bad novel series a long, long time ago. They were done, I guess you could call them the first, an attempt to redo pulp stories as paperbacks.
Mm-hmm.
One had a man, a professor, doctor, what have you, discover Dracula's tomb, beat Dracula the vampire, and insert a small piece of wood near Dracula's heart before he pulled out the stake itself. And the doctor had one advantage. He had slight telekinetic powers. So Dracula became his unwilling slave, because if Dracula didn't do what he wanted, the professor would use his telekinetic powers to drive that piece of wood back into Dracula's heart.
Death by Big Splinter.
And yes, and he used Dracula to fight crime. That's how Dracula would feed off the dead guys. And there was also a companion Frankenstein series, which I probably mercifully blotted out and could probably only recover by deep hypnosis.
Yes.
Baron?
Please, that's not something I want to remember.
Exactly. Anyways, please continue.
That was it. I just, as long as, two vampires books that I would like to mention was S.P. Sumtow's Vampire Junction.
Oh, I've read that.
Yes, in fact, it wound up being a trilogy, and Nancy Collins's Sunglasses After Dark.
Another good one.
Here's one I'm curious if any of the rest of you have read or even heard of from when I was a kid. Has anyone ever heard of a children's book called Prisoner of the Vampires?
No.
Can't say I have.
Brian?
Nope. Got me there.
So, it's a book about a kid. I identified a lot with this book because it's a book about a kid who's a huge vampire, not exactly like me as a kid. And he's writing a term paper for school on vampires. So he keeps going to the library that has all these really cool old books on vampires. And he's having this issue of the teacher of the class wants primary sources, and it's like, where do you find a primary source for vampires?
Somebody
Dig
can
up a
take her on the
grave, pull
phone.
out the stake. Yeah, granted. But lo and behold, he gets approached by this man, and he winds up meeting first Dracula himself, then Lord Retuven, and then Carmilla. And it's very cool, especially as I grew older and found out who these other vampires were.
All we need is Varney to round it out.
Yeah.
I bite you, you bite me, we're a vampire family.
Biting one neck, two neck, and a jugular.
And remember, and Brian brought it up in his presentation, you have to give Count Von Count credit, because there are both Eastern European and Asian legends of vampires that are obsessively counting.
Yeah.
Yes. I remember
Some of them you threw rice and I had to count them all.
Yep.
So you could go.
I was about to say, didn't we mention the rice counting during one of the episodes of Paranormal Encyclopedia?
Most
yeah.
likely.
I think I was the one that brought it up.
Because that's a popular one.
Yes.
The Chinese.
And I've seen a couple of theories about that. One of my favorite theories is I knew someone who swore that vampires were real in the bodies that got up out of the ground and kept moving around sense, who swore that all of those stories about the counting vampires are stories of the same vampire who did a lot of traveling and suffered from obsessive compulsive disorder.
Now, people wonder why I always carry a deck of cards with me. It's if I ever encounter an OCD vampire, I'll just flick a few out. I'll hold a couple in my hand, and it'll just go, "Oh, you dick!" I have to go down and start picking them up and counting them.
I'm gonna have to log off a little in a
Okay,
couple
John,
minutes.
thank you.
Before we go, I just want to mention a vampire novel that not a lot of people realize is a vampire novel. C.J. Henderson, rest his soul. His first Teddy London novel was called Things That Are Not There. And Teddy London runs in, I'm sorry, that's all, let's see. But one of his Teddy London novels.
The second one.
The second one, yes, is about psychic vampires. In
Yes.
which you kill somebody and you get basically their life essence. And because of the events in Things That Are Not There, Teddy London has basically become a vampire.
Yep.
Which he does not realize until he's in a bar and he looks at himself in the mirror, which I thought was a great bit because you have a vampire realizing that he recognizes himself as a vampire by looking into a mirror.
Kind of like Lost Boys.
I wanted to point out for listeners, since CJ was a friend of mine, Brian's, Patrick's, and John's, the book that John's referencing, which is a phenomenal novel, I might add, is The Stench of Fresh Air.
Although that's the current title.
Yeah, the original was Some Things Never Die.
Some Things Never Die, and it was published under the name Richard Morgan because he actually had a mass market paperback deal at the time, and they didn't want people confusing the C.J. Henderson, Jack Hagee novels, which were pure hard-boiled, with the C.J. Henderson, Teddy London novels, which were more supernatural investigation. So he had to call himself Richard Morgan. And Kevin, you remember the first Bianca Jones book?
Yes.
What was the name of the bookseller?
I don't remember, to be honest.
Morgan.
With you. Yes. Oh, good heavens, how did I forget that?
And now you know why.
Yes, that makes sense.
Now you know the rest of the story.
Well,
No.
It has been fun. Thank you for inviting me. I'm going back to doing some work around the house.
John, I want to say thank you so much for joining us, both for this and for the convention in general. You've been a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you. It has been a lot of fun. Goodbye, everybody.
Hasta.
Bye. Good luck with the work around the house.
Okay.
And I have similar commitments, so I'm going to follow John out the door.
But
So,
thank
again,
you as
thank
well
you
for
for
joining
having me.
us. As
My
always,
pleasure.
it's been a pleasure to have you both.
Thank you very much, and you guys enjoy, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
No doubt about
Absolutely.
it.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Take it
Have a
easy.
good night.
And you know what? I gotta finish eating.
Yeah, and it's time actually to move into the closing ceremonies. So we're at a pretty good stopping point, I think.
Okay.
Gentlemen,
well.
it has
Sounds
been a
good.
pleasure to hang out with you both as well as our esteemed guests. We need to
Indeed.
get back into try to get back into doing the show together, in my opinion. This works well as a way to do it.
Yeah.
It makes my life infinitely easier to use this program.
I don't blame you.
And in fact, again, if we're doing it as a show, I can give there's a phone number attached to it. I can give it out. People can actually call in and ask questions.
There you go.
But okay, folks, this is going to wrap up the vampire panel, and we're going to move into, I'm sorry to say, the closing ceremonies for the convention, and call it a weekend. Brian and Baron, thank you both for your participation. You've been fantastic as expected.
Sure.
Oh, thank you. I'm
Thank
glad
you.
to be here.
And I'll be in touch with you both soon because we're friends. We always have something to talk about.
Indeed.
Okay, folks, listening in, it is in fact that time. So I am going to be switching to the very last stream, which will be probably the shortish closing ceremonies for the first Wrath of Khan convention, and then we're going to be done. So please do join us for that. It won't be long, but there's some things I want to say that I think are important. Boys, I'm going to drop you both out just so I have sole control here.
All right.
And, okay, there we go. And then there was one. And I'm ending the stream and going to start again in a second.